It is early spring 1452, and just as chill winds blow across the sceptred fields and the first shoots of the year's growth, so too do the spirits of men feel a cold unease when they cast their eye on the state of the Kingdom of England. Revolt and uprising, murder and assassination have riven the reign of Henry VI, who has sat on the thrones in both London and Paris, but so far has produced no heir to continue his line. With the war in France disintegrating into horrific failure and the loss of vast territories, Henry has seemingly compounded what would already be a disastrous situation by repeating the failures of his predecessors and allowed his court and policies to be run by favourites rather than the men who would presume to lead by merit. To the wise men around him who know their history, they remember the fates that befell Henry's ancestors, Edward and Richard, both of them the second of their name. Installing the men they loved to rule over those most capable, both Edward II and Richard II sealed their own fate, their crowns and thrones taken from under by the strong men who would make good times, and both of them dying in captivity in likely violent circumstances. Now, on the field between Blackheath and Dartford, Henry VI faces the forces of Richard, the 3rd Duke of York, his own kinsman, and likely the most powerful man in England after the king. York, it seems, is willing to use force to have his way, and he will have himself named heir to the throne and clear the court of inept favourites, or else bring hellfire down on any who oppose him. Learning about the lives and adventures of people from ancient or medieval times is always a thrill, but why not dig into your own history too? These days, tracing your roots is easier than ever, thanks to today's sponsor, MyHeritage. All it takes is entering just 7 names into their super simple family tree builder. Your name, your parents' names, and your grandparents. That's it. MyHeritage takes over from there, comparing your info to a massive database of 36 billion records, many of which you won't find anywhere on Google. From there, it gives you instant discovery links. Just click, check out the suggested matches, and if they look good, you could expand your family tree by a ton in just seconds. Personally, I find MyHeritage to be a really fun way to learn more about my ancestors. In the case of my grandfather, who I'd never met, I found out he was a soccer player in the 1950s, which led me to old news articles about him. There's something kind of special, almost like a weird sense of belonging that I get when I learn about my ancestors. If you're curious about your own family history, I totally recommend trying out MyHeritage. You can sign up for a 14-day free trial right now by clicking the link in the description or pinned comment, or just scan the QR code on the screen. York's forces in Dartford appear formidable to all of the scouts from the royal camp who ride forth to review his company in these freezing February days. His numbers are described to the king and his retainers as several thousands, and these companies have deployed cannon along with archers, blades, and small arms. In addition to this array, Norfolk's contingent also includes a naval component, for he has no fewer than 7 supply ships parked on the banks of the Thames. This gives the impression that he is not only preparing for battle, but ready for an entire campaign. The royal party, however, when the two sides meet for the first time on March the 1st, has its own show of power. The king and his royal standard are symbolic enough, but Henry's host actually outnumbers that of York. At the same time, the monarch has brought the Dukes of Exeter, Buckingham, Somerset, and Norfolk, all 4 men equal in rank to York, with no one above them in official station but the king. Along with these most powerful magnates, Henry is aided by the Earl of Devon and Lord Cobham, a veritable conclave of the nation's bishops, and more than 15 other major nobles of the realm. It is an awesome display of royal power. York had hoped that Norfolk in particular was on his side, but he now sees that he is completely isolated and without allies. When Henry's heralds invite him forth to put his case in the royal presence, he has little choice but to comply. Henry hears York's grievances. The Duke is chiefly angered by the actions of Edmund Beaufort, the Duke of Somerset, who as Henry's foremost representative in France, has overseen the loss of Maine and Normandy. York also alleges that Somerset is plotting to hand the port of Calais to the Duke of Burgundy, and also that he misappropriated royal funds during the abandonment of Maine. Somerset is inevitably outraged at these accusations of theft, treason, and cowardice, and he and York's relationship takes on a mortal edge. There is no return to cordiality possible now. For his part, Henry is unmoved by York's fury, but he acts in a more decisive manner than his forebear. He invites York to come with him to London, an offer the Duke is in no position to refuse, with the promise that he will listen and perhaps even grant the nobleman's requests. So the word goes around York's army, which is quickly dispersed. A fortnight later, Somerset is still in position, and York is marched into the auspices of St Paul's Cathedral, where he swears his loyalty to the king and vows on the Bible and cross that he will never use intimidation or violence against the sovereign. It seems that the matter is at a close. A page can be turned. If York and his supporters feel that they have been gulled, there is little they can do about it, given their isolated status and York's own sacred pronouncements. Henry begins touring the countryside with an unforeseen energy, making himself visible to the populace and judging disputes from Wales to the kingdom's eastern shore. Even better, the royal army in France under the Earl of Shrewsbury recaptures Bordeaux, and it seems that the tide of the war on the continent is turning once more in the island nation's favour. Best of all, a year on from the confrontation at Dartford, it is announced that Margaret of Anjou, the French wife of King Henry, is pregnant with their first child. After years of upheaval, the people of England may be able to breathe a sigh of relief and step back from the precipice of civil war. But there are still flickering embers of turmoil beneath the tamped-down cloth of peace. Even after York's neutering, unrest and even armed uprisings against the crown authorities or unpopular nobles has continued in many locales. Suffolk, Kent, Warwickshire, Lincolnshire and Norfolk all see fighting, and Warwickshire in particular has a hot reception for its new Earl, Richard Neville. Meanwhile, his relatives in Yorkshire are involved in an ever-increasing rivalry with the Percy family, who are livid at the upstart clan manoeuvring into what has been their traditional domain. Both families have enough wealth and power to fuel a significant conflict if push comes to shove. Similarly, the Courtenay and Bonville families are also vying for power in the kingdom's West Country, and it appears that England's ruling class is not just fraying at its edges, but in the process of positively unraveling. A strong king with an able sense of justice and fair play would keep these quarrels from descending to the stage of vendetta and bloodletting. But Henry VI is not Henry V. With the war in France going well and the dynasty assured at the imminent arrival of an heir, the pot can just about be halted from boiling over. But then come the events of July 17th, 1453. Talbot and the English army are utterly annihilated by the French cannon at Castillon, and those that are not reduced to gore and viscera amidst the shattered and dismembered limbs on the field are taken prisoner in the aftermath. Perhaps 10,000 fighting men of the English army are lost, and the operational capacity of the London government in mainland Europe effectively ceases to exist. Bordeaux is lost once more, as is the ancient English fief of Gascony, as well as all other continental possessions, with the exception of Calais and the Channel Islands. It is a catastrophe for the English crown, every bit comparable to the collapse of English holdings 2.5 centuries earlier under King John. The gloom is compounded when Henry has a complete breakdown later that August at his hunting lodge in Clarendon, Surrey. Courtiers, advisors, guards, and his pregnant wife look on in horror as the king is struck completely immobile, seemingly unable to speak, move, or communicate with those around him in any way. To the continued terror of his family and government, Henry remains in this catatonic state not just for hours or days, but months, even past the birth of his royal heir, the Prince Edward, that October. The situation in England and its minuscule remaining French holdings demands that some arrangement is needed to appoint a ruler or regent, take the running of law and order in hand, and bring stability to what is swiftly becoming a new dissolution, havoc and lawlessness that is the nightmare of good men everywhere. In that same month, when Henry slips from the world of acuity, Thomas Neville marries Maud Stanhope. Maud's former husband, the 6th Baron Willoughby, is recently dead, leaving her a very substantial fortune. Better still from the Nevilles' point of view, she also stands to inherit half of the fortune of Ralph, the 3rd Baron Cromwell, former treasurer and one of the richest men in the realm. Cromwell has his own disputes over land and offices, and he lives in fear of kidnap or assassination. An alliance with the daunting Nevilles and the pooling of their resources suits both sides. The marriage further antagonizes the Percy family, for Cromwell holds castles and properties they believe to be rightly theirs, and the prospect of these Percy lands passing into Neville hands is seen as an abhorrent insult. Thomas and Maud are duly married at Cromwell's seat in Tattershall and begin a return journey to the Neville base in York when their procession is attacked and ambushed by a force of 5,000 men, led by Thomas Percy, Lord Egremont. Though it is a wedding procession, Neville, his relatives and friends are armed, and there is a vicious fight. Both bride and groom survive and reach a place of safety, but such a profane and vile act as an attack on a wedding demands restitution, and the enraged Nevilles intend to take such recompense by their own hands. Across Yorkshire, Cumbria and Northumberland, open warfare breaks out between the clans, disrupting crown revenues and leaving the border with Scotland that families like the Nevilles, Percys and the Duke of York have long protected, open to attack. Even the promise of the growing Prince Edward does not change matters. When presented to his father, the king, Henry makes no response, looking at the infant with empty eyes, and then returning his gaze to the floor. Some proper arrangement needs to be made, but the Somerset regime has lost all legitimacy and authority after the debacle in France, and in late October, the Great Council of Nobles and Prelates called at Westminster asks the Duke of York to join their number. York, who still believes his claim to be the true heir to the throne through his descent from 2 sons of Edward III, stronger than Henry or the newborn Edward, reaches London toward the middle of November and immediately forces the arrest of Somerset. Seeing themselves with no other choice given the state of the kingdom, his fellow lords and the churchmen acquiesce, and Somerset is locked in the Tower of London to await trial. Margaret of Anjou attempts to introduce legislation in the first month of the new year to make herself regent, but England's elite do not believe that putting a foreign-born woman in charge of national affairs will alleviate the crisis. Although they do pronounce Edward as Prince of Wales, in the closing days of March 1454, Richard, Duke of York, is named Protector of the realm. His status alleviated after its near destruction at Dartford, York is thus supreme. He spends the remainder of the year consolidating both his power base as well as the situation in England. There follows a period of calm in the kingdom, and once more men can afford to think of the future rather than the imminent survival of the nation. As Richard returns to his northern home at the end of the year to celebrate Yuletide and the coming festive season, he too can look forward in satisfaction toward the years to come, when he has no doubt he will acquire the throne itself. But then, like a dirty block of coal placed in York's stocking as a bad joke, Henry VI rises from bed on Christmas morning and asks those in attendance what day it is and where he can find his wife. York could not have received a worse present in his wildest imagination. To those around Henry, they watch and wonder as he seems to pick up immediately where he left off more than a year before, acting in a completely normal and rational manner, and busily attending to his duties as a royal head of state. The king seems to have no memory of the preceding year, and greets his son with joy for the first time. It is an utter disaster for York. A month on from Henry's awakening, Somerset is released and reinstated to his previous status. Margaret of Anjou's steely personality works to have him put back in favour and against the man that took the regency from her. York is removed from his role as protector by the second week of February. By the end of the first week of March, the charges against Somerset of treason for the French losses are dismissed, and he is a free man. York is also dismissed from his command of Calais, and Somerset is put into his place. To further compound the Yorkist losses, Richard Neville, the Earl of Salisbury, father of the Earl of Warwick, is forced to step down as Chancellor. York, completely undone by Henry's return, and in consternation that the men he thinks of as his friends have been removed from office, withdraws from London with the Nevilles, and they ride back to their northern heartlands. London is popularly behind York, but the city is not safe for him with Somerset and the Queen in power, and so he and the Nevilles decide that there is little option left for them but to prepare to fight for their rights. With no intention of being outnumbered again, York sends messengers across his domains from Wales to Northumberland. In April, their fears seem to be realised. At a conference in London, Somerset leads a gathering of the royal administration to which neither York, Warwick, nor Salisbury receive invitations. It is announced in the wake of this Westminster meeting that a great council will take place the following month at Leicester. It is made clear that York and Warwick are expected to appear at this assembly, which will provide for the king's safety against his enemies. The northern lords are accordingly offended by this wording and threatened in the extreme. York remembers the fate of Humphrey of Lancaster, the Duke of Gloucester, who had answered an identical summons to a convocation at Bury St Edmunds 7 years earlier. Arrested on arrival, Gloucester, the uncle of Henry VI, had died while imprisoned. Avoiding such an end is York's primary goal, and he turns his home of Sandal Castle into a fortress with an army of his retainers camped outside. Already at war with the Percys, Warwick and Salisbury do the same at their seats of Warwick Castle and Middleham. Word of this mustering reaches London, but Somerset does not act nearly as decisively as his enemies. Messengers are sent to the northern lords to stand down their armies, while other missives are delivered to the king's supporters along the route from London to Leicester. Departing from London on the 20th of May with the king, Somerset tells his allies that they are to convene at the town of St Albans, midway between the capital and the eventual destination of Leicester. Fast riders are dispatched to the strongholds of York, Warwick and Salisbury, telling each one to send their newly raised forces home and attend to the king with only a small personal guard of 160 men, each for Warwick and Salisbury, but 200 for York, to allow for his higher rank. When the messengers find the recipients, however, they are no longer in their castles. York and the others have already marched south with an even greater speed than Somerset and the king could anticipate, and they and an army numbering in the thousands are dotted around the village of Royston, just a few hours away from the king's imminent destination. York and his allies prepare and send a reply to Henry, professing their loyalty to him personally and his sacred role as king, yet also pointedly refusing to stand down their assembled host. But they address the message to the Archbishop of Canterbury in his role as Henry's Chancellor in London. The Archbishop sends a messenger with the letter to the royal party, but for reasons unknown, it appears to never reach Henry. York will later say that Somerset conspired to keep his pledge from the monarch. Thus, Henry and his party do not receive York's reply. When the royal party stay the night in Watford, 9 miles south of St Albans, on the 21st of May, they are unaware that York has reached the town of Ware, roughly the same distance of St Albans, on the far side. York attempts to send another letter with a similar profession of loyalty to Henry in the early hours of the morning, but this also does not reach the king. A rude awakening comes the next morning when Henry and Somerset make to begin their progress, and messengers hurtle past their advance guards to bring news that York and his allies are approaching the fields and laneways of St Albans with a force of close to 10,000 men. There is no doubt, the riders say, that this time the king is outnumbered. Henry and his party are not prepared for this development. They have sent orders for the raising of forces to towns around the countryside like Coventry, 70 miles northwest of St Albans, but there has not been time for these forces to organise and march. In all, Henry and Somerset have about 2,000 men in their column. Similarly, York is awaiting his ally, the Duke of Norfolk, but for the moment, he holds the advantage. When King Henry nears St Albans, he does hold a larger number of the nobles in his retinue. Among them are the ever-present Somerset and his son, the Earl of Dorset. The Earls of Devon and Wiltshire also ride with the royal party, as well as the Duke of Buckingham and his own son, the Earl of Stafford. Henry Percy, Earl of Northumberland, and sworn enemy of York allies, the Nevilles, is also in the king's train. But so too is William Neville, the Lord Falkenberg, who is the brother of York's staunch ally, Salisbury, and uncle to the Earl of Warwick. This mixed party would indicate to York that the king still intends some kind of rapprochement, but Queen Margaret and almost the entire clergy are not travelling with the king, as is their usual custom. Certainly, Henry and Somerset in particular are expecting violence to be a possibility. At a hurried roadside conference, Somerset recommends that the king has his men dig in at a defensible spot and fortify the area. With a secure position, they can await the thousands of loyal bannermen that are on their way to aid his cause in the coming hours and days. Falkenberg and Buckingham, on the other hand, advise Henry to ride on to St Albans, negotiate with York as he has done before, and bring this upsetting matter to a conclusion in peace rather than irreversible violence. Despite Somerset's objection that St Albans is not a walled town, and the king will be powerless to enforce his rule should York decide to use violence, Henry negates his counsel and gives Somerset's office of Constable of England to Buckingham. And in this mood, the royal party enters St Albans. Henry might have made it clear that he wished for discussion rather than fighting, but his forces quickly set about establishing a perimeter and fortifying the routes into the town. They quickly ascertained that though the town does not have a wall, it is surrounded by a drainage ditch, known locally as the Tonman, that can quickly substitute for a defensive work, especially given that the earth on the town side of the trench is raised, and in most parts is topped with either a hedge or fence. While Henry establishes himself in St Andrew's Chapel in the northwest corner of St Albans Abbey, and his ranks take their places in Moot Hall, his men on the town edge block the three roads of Cock Lane, Shropshire Lane and Sopwell Lane. Heavy timber lengths, known as bars, seem to have been on hand to help with this task, and the king's men are glad of the convenience. It is not long before York and his party arrive and take up position in the space known as Key Field, coming off the Hatfield Road before it merges into Cock Lane, and likely marching alongside the Tonman Ditch for a time. Rather than the near 10,000 that had been mooted as his army's number earlier in the morning, the Duke's force is probably closer to 3,000, but he still has a clear leverage. When the Yorkists set down in the Key Field, they are well within shooting range of both longbow and even crossbow. Although there has been no fighting between the two armies, with the exception of the clan warfare between the Nevilles and Percys, senior men in both camps are veterans of the wars in France, as well as fighting along the Scottish borderlands. York's army possesses a contingent of 600 archers from the northern marches, commanded by Sir Robert Ogle, men who possess the ability to shower the entire town with a hailstorm of razor-sharp bolts if the situation warrants a stiff demonstration of resolve. From Holywell Hill, on which the town sits, the men manning Henry's improvised rampart can spot two boys, verging on manhood, who are sporting at play fighting with one another amidst the Yorkist ranks. These are Edward and Edmund, sons of the Duke Richard. Even from the distance, Henry's men note the auspicious height at which Edward stands, resplendent in his new armour. The heralds go back and forth between the Yorkist camp and the royal party. York's man Mowbray gives the king the assurance that his master is not there to harm or threaten the monarch, merely to see to it that Somerset, the man who lost France and stole the king's monies for himself, is arrested and put where he will do no more harm. King Henry, for his part, will have no discussions with York while he is in arms with a force that appears to threaten his person, and Mowbray attempts to assure the king that the men York and the Nevilles have brought to the field are there to protect and support him against the enemies within his court. Buckingham makes it plain in his messages outside that he is there as an honest broker, a man of the king also, and takes no part with Somerset against York. Mowbray travels back and forth twice with these messages, but neither York nor the king will move from their respective standpoints. York demands him that deserves death, meaning Somerset, and Henry, possibly overruling the more cautious Buckingham, states boldly that any man who does not void the field and continues to offer resistance will be hung, drawn, and quartered. York and the Nevilles have now the choice between surrender and likely imprisonment and death from a restored and vengeful Somerset and his allies, or else attempt to use the force at their disposal to seize him for themselves and take matters into hand like men. Their urgency is compounded by the raising of the royal standard, which declares that the king intends to use violence against anyone present that opposes his orders. Not only that, but anyone still in opposition would be designated a traitor to the crown, and they and their heirs would lose all inheritances. When Mowbray returns a third time to the Yorkist camp, still no further along in his negotiations, he finds the knights, men-at-arms and infantrymen donning armour and mail and moving forth. York himself leads a force to Shropshire Lane, while Salisbury takes a company to Sopwell, both of which run parallel to one another. Warwick, meanwhile, commands a reserve force slightly to the rear of these two parties, with Robert Ogle and the northern marchers alongside his mounted fighters. York and Salisbury attempt to push through the lanes to get to the king and Somerset's position, but the narrowness of the passage confines their numbers and renders any attempt at archery ineffective. It's likely too that most of the men, particularly on the Yorkist side, are hesitant to mortally attack or fire on men in the company of the king. In any case, no headway is made toward the centre of the town. The bars hold, and York is increasingly agitated at the failure to move past the defenders. Increasingly forceful attempts to bludgeon past the bulwarks meet the same result. York and Salisbury must feel that the ground is sinking away beneath their horses' hooves, and their armour runs with sweat. Two village laneways are the difference between salvation and a life that leads only to gallows or the executioner's block. On the other side, Henry, Somerset, and all of their company had been stunned at the onset of the attack, and many of them were without armour or even taking mid-morning food and drinks at St Albans taverns. Now they are preparing themselves for battle and rushing forth to reinforce the men in the lanes. York can see these additions sprinting forward, and he despairs that his numerical advantage has come to naught in the tiny alleys. But behind him, Warwick has seen the opening. Rather than rushing his numbers behind York or his father Salisbury to add to the press, he sends Ogle forward with the archers and opens up with a volley on the now tightly defended Tonman ditch. Those men standing guard on the makeshift rampart duck out of the path of 600 onrushing and lethal missiles, and then stay down when the same number cuts through the air around them less than 10 seconds later. Warwick gives a shout, and his knights and men-at-arms charge ahead, jumping the trench and earthen rampart as though they are at the hunt, and then crashing into the gardens and plots that lie behind. Once they are through, there is no getting them out, and Yorkist horsemen and infantry begin to stream in after them. Warwick leads his crew past the houses and up to Holywell Hill and St Peter's Street. Once there, emerging between the Quay and Chequers Inns, they fan out in both directions and rain down blows and hacking slashes with sword and lance on the unsuspecting Lancastrians. The royal party and Somerset are overwhelmed by this sudden appearance. Henry's household guard form up and attempt to defend the king at the southern end of St Peter's Street, which is wide enough that it is used as a livestock market. This suits the attackers, for they are ever growing in numbers. Those men defending the lanes for the king have realized that they are in danger of being surrounded and begin to fall back. York and Salisbury rush forward, with all of the frustration of their futile attacks venting itself on the hapless and unfortunate escapees. Somerset and a small number of retainers attempt to barricade themselves in the Castle Inn, in a side street off the main square. But the king is a much more visible target. Warwick's archers and the men hurtling in from the lanes fire volleys of arrows at his exposed guard, and they quickly blanch under the onslaught. Henry himself is struck around the shoulder and taken to a cottage, where York's men find him and put him under the Duke's protection. Henry's upset and agitation is hardly helped by the fact that the owner of the cottage is a tanner, or maker of leather, a trade that involves the retention and stripping of animal hides and soaking them in a urine solution. The delicate monarch is far from his usual and accustomed surroundings. Outside, the royal standard that had flown in glory on the field of Agincourt is left lying in the gutter by Henry's dead and departing bodyguard. With the king safely in custody, York moves to find Somerset, which he does, and the castle inn is surrounded. Seeing that the end is at hand, Somerset rushes from the front door and kills 4 of York's men, before he is finally brought down and dies on the street. Through the now electric atmosphere on the main street, men walk around unsteadily as though they have only just watched a hurricane blow through. King Henry is quickly transported to the abbey, his jailers weaving their way through the strewn corpses and over blood-soaked cobbles. Henry Percy, Earl of Northumberland, is found amongst the dead, a satisfying revenge slaying for the Nevilles. In spite of the fact that thousands took part in the fighting, the chroniclers are unanimous that fewer than 200 died on both sides in what would eventually become known as the First Battle of St Albans. For the moment, Englishmen are still reluctant to kill their own brethren, but that morality will erode as the bloodshed drags on over months, years, and eventually decades. With York's capture of Henry and the killing of Somerset, there is no doubt among any of the men standing under St Albans churches and taverns on this sunny summer's day that a new line has been crossed. But there are surely none who can predict that the fighting will only end with the death of York's youngest child, Richard, a boy born not 3 winters previous, in 30 years' time. For the moment, the advantage lies with York, but even he knows that this single action will not and cannot prevent the spilling of yet more blood, and his fate is a hazy picture of uncertainty and inevitable violence. From the tremors of St Albans streets, England has begun to quake. Don't forget to try out My Heritage. Sign up for a 14-day free trial and start discovering your family history. If you like what you see, consider supporting my work on Patreon, and you get ad-free early access to my videos for as little as $1. You can also show your support by liking the video, commenting, and subscribing to my channel as a sacrifice to the algorithm. As always, I'll see you in the next one.